Maybe a pot about this high. She can see maybe it's poison. I didn't hear. But never mind, I went first.
Other than my cat was monkey, but they can't see the video one way or make a difference one way or another.
Is the counter going?
Exactly.
It's so simple. They overcomplicate it and they can't do it.
Yep.
Find out.
Oh, boy.
The planning board meeting of March 5th, 2019 to order. 6:32. First, the thing on the agenda is public comment. This is where at any time the public can make comment on anything but what's on the agenda. I see we're gonna have a lot of public comment tonight, so who would like to start? Tom?
You probably guess what I'm gonna say. I'd like the board to consider allowing the use of the recording equipment in this room when you meet up here. Granted, right now, that's only once a month, maybe twice a month. You don't have to do anything, volunteer to run the equipment. Just want the board to consider it. You know, lots of interest here. I imagine there'd be lots of people out there who'd like to hear what the comments are, both for and against the warrant article that will probably is gonna be discussed.
Thank you. Anybody else? Cynthia?
Question for you. So we're here, with the Conservation Commission, what Article 3, would we be, speak now or
Speak
under
now.
other
Public comment,
business?
that's gonna be it.
Okay. So, the Conservation Commission sent a letter to the planning board, and, you know, we have some serious concerns about Article 3. us, reassure us. You know, I think you have a copy of the letter, maybe not, but the letter, this is an advisory letter from the Conservation Commission regarding Article 3. In general, the amendments contained in zoning Article 3 are very comprehensive and reflect an admirable effort by the Planning Board and Town Planner Bruce Woodruff. The Conservation Commission commends the Planning Board for the scope and vision of Article 3 with some important exceptions. The Milton Conservation Commission is appointed by the Board of Selectmen to act as an advisory land use board regarding Milton's natural resources. Unfortunately, the Milton Conservation Commission was not invited to be part of the zoning update process. We were unaware of the zoning amendments until the week before the deliberative session, when we were contacted by Three Ponds Protective Association and several other citizens and landowners concerned about some of the changes. The purpose of this letter is to alert the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen that there are certain zoning changes that can result in unintended consequences that may be deleterious to Milton's natural resources. And here are major concerns. Article 2, definitions. Adding a definition for a recreational facility, which uses amusement park as an example, included in the definition, along with other high-impact activities. An amusement park is high-impact use inconsistent with other low-impact uses stated in the definition. This addition is particularly unfortunate given the current Mighty Joe versus Milton lawsuit. The change may make the town's defense more difficult and encourage the applicants to resubmit as an amusement park or under some other allowed uses under recreational facility. Article 3, Section 3.5, Table of Principal Uses. This is the second bullet point.
I am part of the ZBA, and it was something present under discussion, so no offense, but I'm going to leave the room.
Okay.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. The second bullet point is concerned Article 3, Section 3.5, Table of Principal Uses. Modifying the existing requirement that a recreational facility in low-density residential zoning district be permitted by right rather than by special exception granted by the ZBA. Please be aware that according to Stratford Regional Planning Commission, the Planning Board cannot legally enforce more stringent conditions that are contained in existing town and state regulations to protect sensitive ecological areas or otherwise. Conformance to any additional conditions imposed during a Planning Board site review would be strictly voluntary. Especially in view of the first bullet point, we and other towns do not assume that in all instances the existing regulations are sufficient to protect the welfare of the town and its natural resources, which is why the current status is special exception. The next bullet point, Article 8, Section 1A. Removing certain general ZBA criteria for special exceptions. Existing general criteria such as, quote, the use will not be injurious, noxious, offensive, or detrimental to the neighborhood, has been removed and replaced with more specific criteria for given uses. While this makes what is allowed and disallowed more clear-cut, it presumes perfect foresight, that there will never be an unforeseen condition that is allowed but detrimental to the neighborhood and its natural environment. Eliminating general criteria removes the power of interpretation for the sake of clarity. We believe general criteria should be retained as a fallback to protect our neighborhoods. Doing so does not preclude using the additional specific criteria. Note that Rochester, Northampton, Ospey, Wilbur, and doubtless other towns as well use general ZBA criteria very similar to what Milton has now. The next bullet point, Article 8, Section 1A. The special exception general conditions should include one that explicitly states the goals of protecting natural resources in a manner consistent with the master plan. Although that should be understood, it is useful to state it in this context so that the intent is not lost in the narrow focus of specific reviews. Next bullet point, Article 8, Section 3A1. On an existing lot, the erection of a structure or septic system within the wetland may be permitted by special exception. The next next bullet point, Article 8, Section 3A3, shall not prohibit the construction of structures within the buffer zone or for other lots that were approved for subdivision by the planning board or which otherwise legally existed on or before November 21st, 2018. Please note that the town wetland ordinance in existence long before 2018 does not allow construction in wetland buffer zones. This will be interpreted as permission to violate buffer regulations which were in effect prior to subdivision of a lot. The next bullet point, Article 8, Section 3B, allowing up to 400 square foot camping cabins on 50% of campground sites, which will result in additional impervious surfaces, septic systems, and other activities that may be detrimental to lake or pond water quality. This appears to be a high-density residential situation without a requirement for town sewer. And to sum it up, the Conservation Commission realizes that Article 3 will be voted on by the citizens on March 12th. But we would like assurance that the planning board will work with the Conservation Commission this year to discuss and come to agreement on the above zoning issues. I mean, we are a advisory land use board. For some reason, we were included in this process. I don't think I'd be standing here if we were. And, you know, I think that, and Bruce came to one of our meetings, I think he agrees that it would be good to start communicating better between boards. I've been here for 28 years. The most galvanizing, highly attended events were centered around our natural resources, like the Big Dig and the 2 landfill proposals. People came out in record numbers because of our natural resources. And, you know, we just have to remember that people in this town really value its lakes and ponds and the rural character. So I think all of us would appreciate being included. That's what we're here for. So thank you for your time.
Anybody else? Anybody?
Jen King, 38 Lakeside Drive. I'm not sure how all this works, but I wanted to see if there would be any possible reconsideration of the planning board of the vote. I know that sometimes boards can do that if they get more information along the way. And I know last night the selectman said that he had a different feeling than he originally voted. And I just didn't know if that was something you would consider doing, having a reconsideration.
Ballots are all done.
Okay.
Can't change it.
But you can say if your opinions change, you could still have that be made public if anybody has had any change of heart.
We'll only be here, that would be it.
Right. I just.
Anybody else?
Yes, I'm going to speak. Kari Lag. And I wasn't planning on speaking, but I would like to say that I'd like the board to consider if certain things do come to pass and this amusement park is built, I'd like the planning board to consider costs of repairing lakes. We're already in an issue where there's an invasive species, and that's a cost. So just to consider the cost of repercussions from something this large. Thank you.
Any more?
I'm Wayne Sylvester, Micah Paris. We spoke before the Board of Selectmen last night. And this issue is one that has been ongoing now for quite a while. In fact, Norm Turgeon, who's our Lake Association president, was in communication with Bruce as late as Sunday morning at 9:49. And this is what he said. Hi, Bruce. The amended zoning ordinance proposed by the planning board defines a recreational facility as a building or designated area dedicated to specific leisure activities, such as bicycle paths, fishing and boating piers, playing fields, tennis and basketball courts, amusement parks, skating rinks, recreational centers, and golf courses. that would make a recreational facility a permitted use by right rather than by special exception in the LDR zoning district. PVPA, the Milton Conservation Commission, and many Milton property owners are concerned that these changes will be interpreted as permitting high-impact amusement parks in the LDR zone. And I just heard the letter from the Milton Conservation Commission. That's one aspect. The possibility of an amusement park in Milton, and particularly given recent litigation between Mighty Joe and Northgate, it just seems to me to open up Pandora's box. It gives them the opportunity to go and say, it's a permitted use, and therefore, we'll see you in court for that. When you say golf courses, does that mean that they can go and put in a 9-hole golf course if they have the room? And the impact of that, whether it is right on the shorefront, which it won't be, it'll be set back according to regulations, is that from a lake association standpoint, anytime you go and change the impervious surface of an area located near water bodies, then you begin to go and worry about non-point source erosion, which is an issue already on Milton 3 ponds. Nobody has to tell you that those 3 ponds are your greatest resource you have. And anything that will go and jeopardize the degradation of that water quality, which is already, we're holding our own, as I mentioned to the Board of Selectmen last night. We're considered a middle-aged mesotropic lake. And so far, we have over 25 years of data that shows that we have some ups and downs. But generally, we're holding our own. But my concern was, and our concern, not just DPPA, but the Milton Conservation Commission, is that anything that might come in that will change that impervious surface or might jeopardize water quality, be it increased numbers of campsites at Mighty Joe Campground, traffic flow, increased numbers of people, that I'm not sure how much more boat traffic, swimmers, camps, whatever, Milton 3 ponds can accommodate. I don't know what the carrying capacity of ponds are, but I truly believe that right now we're close to that limit. And to do anything that might jeopardize that, I think would be.
Judy Boucher, 225 Hillside. I just had a question. I don't know if you can answer it or not. I'm trying to learn this whole process as well, and wondering if there's any way to understand where are these definitions coming from. I'm understanding that there is a dictionary somewhere that maybe isn't public knowledge or whatever, but is there a way to know where all these definitions are coming from so we can try to start reading more, educating ourselves, and kind of wrapping our heads around how this process continues?
It's the American Planning Association Planning Advisory Service, Dictionary of Common Land Use Terms.
Is that the name of the book? So like you could try, is there any way that we could get a hold of that book so we can just kind of learn and educate ourselves?
I think you'd have to pay for it. It's not available online. And you have to be a member of the American Planning Association to even be able to do it. But I think that you.
Is there one in Milton?
Pardon me?
We have no problem getting from the Stratford Regional Planning Commission.
Yeah.
It seems to be very helpful.
Okay, thank you very
Yeah.
much for your help.
That's a good,
I don't,
good
there's
idea.
not one in, no, there's not one in town hall.
Okay,
Just to
thank you.
answer that question.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Richard Burke, 36 Lakeside Drive. I'm not sure that I submitted a letter to through social media on Article 3, and I don't know that all of you had a chance to review that. Maybe you don't even look at
It's on
social.
Facebook, I don't know when it is.
Well, there you go. So that's why I decided I would share this with you this evening. Article 3, as proposed, does not strengthen our zoning ordinance. If anything, it potentially weakens it by creating a slippery slope that it might irreparably damage our cherished natural resources. And it weakens the reasoning and value of why we have low-density residential zones. It also creates potential local undesirable land uses, which can and will devalue adjacent private properties, and I think we all have to think that through. Furthermore, it potentially undercuts our citizens' best interests by enabling non-resident corporations to establish programs and/or services that are inconsistent with the citizens' many desires, which are expressed in our master plan, and which otherwise would be prohibited through the protections of spot zoning. I look at this as being a potential backdoor to spot zoning. Recreational facilities and amusement parks terminology, along with changes being proposed to the established table of principal uses, will weaken the benefits and character of living in our community's low-density residential zones. New Hampshire has established regulations for low-density residential zones that set standards and restrictions, such as restricting the number of dwellings, the housing units per acre, or area of land. It establishes very distinct and desirable neighborhood advantages: less congestion, less traffic, less noise, light, smoke, odor, and other protections, provides for greater privacy, maintains more open space, and it excludes large and undesirable industries or other entities. How does the establishment of recreational facilities, amusement parks, and the many proposed changes that are being suggested to the principal use categories, from prohibited to special exception and/or to permitted uses, enhance the existing peace, tranquility, and quiet enjoyment our residents currently have in low-density residential zones? It's absolutely inappropriate. Checks and balances provided by a more comprehensive ZBA and planning board review with community involvement outweighs and strengthens a more diluted approach to review. Planning is supposed to resolve, not create, neighborhood problems. It should segregate incompatible uses and prevent new development from negatively interfering with the established character of our neighborhoods and our community. I recommend that people vote no on this Trojan horse proposal and send it back to you, the planning board, for redrafting, not from the top down, but with the concerned citizens from the bottom up, and present it at next year's town meeting. I thank you.
Yes,
Do I need to get back up there? Can I just ask from here?
go ahead.
Can you clarify for me in the definition, does that include park models? Because it's not
State of
spelled
New
out.
Hampshire approved park models as campus. That's the only reason. That's not something the town decided. That was done by the state of New Hampshire legislation 2 years ago.
So park models count as RVs?
Yes, they do. As the building inspector, I couldn't even inspect the ones they brought in. I have nothing to do with it. They're completely an animal we don't touch.
So, and you don't even have to look at what they attach to or anything?
Nope.
And then my other question was, and group is trying so hard to kind of get clarity, I'm wondering why there was no definition of resort put in at all, because that came up all the time in the ZBA meetings. And I don't know if there's a reason that wasn't considered, but.
Went to ZBA level, not here.
Well, the answer is that we don't have a permitted use of a resort, so why would you define it?
It's like junkyard. You can find junkyard, you can have them. Any more questions or comments?
Brian, I was curious about what you just said about recreational vehicles. I was looking at some New Hampshire statutes regarding campers, recreational vehicles, and manufactured housing. And there was, the Campers Association was involved in this, and it's my understanding that that's all taxable property now, and that the state of New Hampshire has encouraged and this goes back to 2014, if I'm not mistaken, encouraging the towns to, in fact, tax these properties. Laconia, for example, made a big issue about this, and they were hoping to get over $6 million worth of revenues to their tax base for all of these RVs that aren't being taxed. Clearly, they're not being registered, they don't have plates on them, they're not moving them, they're basically seasonal cottages. And my understanding is that New Hampshire is encouraging you to, in fact, tax those. Other towns are.
That's entirely up to the assessing department, nothing to do with the planning board or building department. They register them, they can't be taxed.
Right, if they're
The
registered.
next week, the assessor will go out next year or the year after April 1st and check. That's what has to be done. It's nothing to do with us.
Well, I guess my concern is I looked at the property cards from Mighty Joe going back. I have some of them one of them from 2017. I don't have the 2018. And they had 184 or 186 campers listed, and they had an assessed valuation, average assessed valuation of $500.
That's, again, nothing to do with us. That's, you want to take it up to the assessor, not us.
Well, I'm just saying as
Those
city,
campers didn't
as,
come into last year either. The park malls, I don't believe, come in until last year, last spring. And if they were brought in after April 1st, they wouldn't be taxed.
And they're not limited then in any way, the number of, they can put them in on every campsite?
As long as they got campsites, yes.
this is, the New Hampshire Campground Owners Association actually is the one that floated this. And it said the provision entitles municipalities to tax the park models, which represent the bulk of the assessed valuation of recreational vehicles. So those are the same. I thought you said they were separate, recreational vehicles and park models.
No, they're considered the same.
Okay, I misheard you. I'm
I
sorry.
think they've only got 2 or 3 down there right now.
Yeah, they said Laconia was assessed to recapture $6,568,000, or 66% of the assessed valuation. And they said there's a place called Bristol Shores, which means all of their units were gonna be taxable.
Very well be. I think we're getting off what we're here for, so any more comments, questions?
I'm gonna get back to definitions again, I'm sorry. Would it by any, if anybody would know, if it would by any chance be this, what's called a planner's dictionary through the American Planning Association and the PAS, that looks like you have to be a member for $25? If that might be the source that we're looking for, is there any way that at some point that could be put into a budget, so maybe the town of Milton could have one? Sorry, I'm just hung up on trying to learn.
I could send you partial of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm gonna close the public comment now. Excuse me, and I'm gonna open it up to the board. Anybody got any questions or comments from the public here?
So the assessing that you're talking about, you assess the campground for what people have put on them?
Correct.
Or you're talking about assessing what's put on the ground?
Taxable property.
Right.
The property
So that's the
card,
campground owner. You're not, when they put these things on, they don't own the ground underneath, right? It's still a campground.
well, there's different effects. The campground owner may not be responsible. So if the campers that are there have plates on them and they're actively registered, then they're not taxable.
Except what you
However,
pay on your-
However, what the other town assessors have been saying is that these are not intended to be movable vehicles. They're permanently there for over 45 days. They have porches, they have canopies, they're not going anywhere. And so the towns are saying, look, there's tax revenue to be made here. So they have to bill, if it's an individual owner, they would have to send the tax bill to them, or they send it to the campground owner, for the campground owner to do that. My concern was that there's a list in this town that people are working on of over 100 businesses. And we used to have a private business, and many businesses have taxable property. And according to our documents, on January 1st of every year, all of these places are supposed to submit a list to the town of that taxable property. It can be checked by the codes officer, who many times is the representative. It's not unless we've delegated it out to the assessing department. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm looking into it and I'm getting this document.
I was just trying to figure out whether you're talking about what's on the ground, not the ground. Is that?
It's on the property. Whether it's fixed to the ground or not is not the issue.
The shadow then, I mean the ground underneath.
No, your tax, if there's a camper there.
Yeah.
And it's on a site
And it has no place.
and it has no place,
All right, I got that.
that's taxable.
Okay.
It's taxable if it hasn't been moved for 45 days.
Even with place.
Correct.
I got one parked in my driveway.
Well, you're not on a public campground and you're not another state person, so, yeah. I mean, it has to be,
Probably wouldn't get $500.
well, and yours may be worth that, but what I'm saying is there's 184, 186 of them on the property card for 2017 from Mighty Joe. And that's what they're assessed at, is $500.
Thank you. Anything else to say?
So, I mean, there's no intent to lure an amusement park. If it doesn't fit with Milton, it's not going to get passed by the planning board. They have to come before us for site plan approval anyways. So if said company came with an amusement park and said, we want to put this here in Milton, if it doesn't fit with Milton's master plan, it's not going to be passed by us either way. Am I correct with the rest of the board saying that?
But if it's a permitted use.
They still have to come before us to be, for a site plan approval, so if it doesn't fit, yeah, we still have to vet it, and if we don't see fit, it's not going to get passed. That's the thing.
It's an allowed use.
And
You
at
deny
that,
it.
at that time, though, and please, Stefan, if I'm
If it's an allowed
misspeaking, and I'm more so looking at Bruce here, but if the planning board sees a huge impact to, let's say, the lake, we could put stipulations in there that they have to meet certain guidelines to come in. And if they can't meet that, then it couldn't be done.
No, we're all done with public comment.
Responding to you.
No, all right.
Mr.
Public
Chairman,
comment closed. We'll get this up to you now.
would
Yes, go ahead.
you permit me a couple of comments?
Sure.
I don't want to talk a lot tonight, but, I do the things that were, in Cynthia's letter. I, did talk with the executive director of the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, about the statement in the letter that, the planning board can't do this. And, I can't remember the exact words that were in the letter. But after my talk with the executive director, and I explained to her that I was talking about the fact that the planning board has the authority by both case law and statute to make reasonable conditions on any application that comes to you. And those reasonable conditions can have to do with making sure that things happen, making sure that things like stormwater, infrastructure, it continues to work in perpetuity, and that town continues to get inspection and maintenance records reports. That's one example. Another example is when the planning board sees that development is going to affect other properties, the planning board can reasonably make conditions to make that developer do something off their site. The executive director not only now agrees with me, and really what happened was that the question to them was not worded with the right terms. And so I believe it was Kyle that answered, and I have the email stream. The answer was in answer to that question and not in answer to the question about whether you can make reasonable conditions. I hope you understand what I just said to you. I also have the citation from the New Hampshire Planning Board Handbook that was just revised in December of 2018 that talks all about conditions subsequent that may be made by you. And I just want to clear that up. That is not correct. And the second thing is the letter that Cynthia read talked about the fact that you had, in your amendment, had done away with general criteria in favor of the specific criteria. And as you know, that's not the case. Some of the general criteria were changed a little, but any applicant that comes and asks for a special exception has to pass the general criteria and the specific criteria. We didn't take the general away. And I think you all know that, but I just want to make sure everybody else knows that. I guess that goes to what you were talking about, Ryan. And,
Can you define the general, because I see some questions, so I'll ask it. Can you define the general criteria, please?
yeah, I can go get the actual wording
If it gives
of the
better
change.
clarification, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, what it does is it makes some of the general criteria a bit more specific so that the zoning board has measurables to, you know, base their judgment on. And the 13 of the special exceptions now have specific criteria. And to that, I will say, this conversation about park models being placed in campgrounds, wherever they are. One of the specific criteria that you put in for any new campground that would try and come here is that you would limit those park models and little camp cabins and yurts to 15% of the total number of campsites proposed. That's probably not good for taxes, but it really maintains the idea that it really is going to remain a camping ground and nothing else. So I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding is the word I'm looking for on some of the things that you wrote. I go back to the idea that the definitions section for recreational facility inadvertently had that in there. No, none of you, and you can say whether I'm right or wrong, none of you paid any attention to it, because that clause is recreational facility is this, and here are some examples, and the words that are in there are such as. All right, so it says such as amusement park, but that name amusement park doesn't show up in your table of permitted uses at all. So in my mind, it's not a permitted use. And I'm certain that whoever the zoning administrator is, whether it's the code enforcement officer or someone else here, rules so. Because that's what I think everybody wants. Mr. Sylvester that read part of Norm Turgeon's letter to me in an email didn't read the other part. I would hope that we would take that up maybe next or under town planner comments. I mean, he's suggesting a clarifying statement be put on the record by the planning board. And I agree with him, because what it does is it says, hey, this isn't what we really mean. I think people read more into it than it really is. But the bottom line is that if you do take a look at that clarifying statement and you vote to endorse it and just place it on the record, that would go a long way. I think that letter should have been read in total to you, not stopped. And I know you have copies of it here in front of you.
Thank you.
One of those things we looked at when we were looking at this was actually the specifics, because it was so general, and that reinforces and puts limitations right in it. That's why we started doing it.
Right.
You know? And that's the whole basis for it, it's not to take one and not the other.
I've got a couple comments. The invitation of other boards to come to our decisions on zoning is posted in 3 places. It's done every year. We don't invite anybody. It's a public notice that says, we're having this, we're changing the zoning, we're having a discussion, this is a public hearing. It's done every year right about the same time. We've never denied anybody any access, ever. It's always open to the public. This is the most people I've seen here, and it's always a reactionary, not informative. It's always something reactionary. That's when we get crowds of people. We don't like what you did, and where were you, when the meetings were there. It's posted in 3 places. It's always there. If you want it reactionary, it seems like every time it's just everything we do is reactionary. And as far as Mr. Church's, I'm gonna read this into the minutes.
Sure.
Yep, and if the board wants to vote on it, so be it. Proposed definition of a recreational facility includes amusement parks as one of the several examples of the type of leisurely activities intended. In addition, the amended zoning ordinance would make a recreational facility a permitted use by right rather than by special exception in low-density residential zone. The legislative intent of these changes in the LDR zone is to permit buildings or designated areas dedicated to leisure activities that are consistent with the stated purpose of this zone, which is to permit land uses in a low-density environment. It is not to permit high-density activities of an amusement park as one traditionally defined. And the intention of having such clarifying statement on record is important to preclude future legal battles over site plan review decisions. Absent such as the statements in the archives, the legislative intent will likely be misinterpreted. And that's the end of the letter from Mr. Turgeon. How does the board feel about adopting this into the minutes of this meeting?
I'll make a motion that the board adopt.
Do I have a second?
Statement as read.
All those in favor? All those opposed?
This is not public comment, but I would like to respond to what, the reason that I did not read that is because I knew that tonight, that the legislative intent was supposed to be brought up before this board by Bruce. Therefore, that is why I did not read it.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I hear a lot about conservation, the quality of our assets, the assets of the lakes. And I agree with all those things. What I never hear about is the number of boats, the counts of boats we have on that lake. Every boat I know of that has a motor on it puts oil and gasoline into that river. Every one of them. We have discussed that. We have requirements on what we can put in for retaining walls. We don't have anything about the boats. So it's always seems to be one way to me. That's just my opinion, my take on that.
Okay.
Similar to the comment I made last night, certainly don't want to create any tensions between any boards. I think that everybody on all the boards have good intentions and mean well. One thing that does bother me with all this is, I'm not trying to point any fingers or call anybody out, and I don't, it's not meant to be a witch hunt by any means. But I think the statement that the planning board didn't reach out to the Conservation Commission is an unfair statement. I've seen emails that went out from our town planner when we were discussing this, and maybe it was just an error, and it happened to fall through the cracks. I think the concern and items that the Conservation Commission is concerned about and bringing up is definitely worthy of having a conversation, and it's unfortunate that it's really too late now. But I just think it's important to get that out there. And I hope that going forward, we can all continue to work together and really do what's best and right for the town.
Thank you. I guess I have a question for us, referencing last night's selectmen meeting.
little pieces from here, little pieces from there. Without equal dissemination. Actually, I'll probably have to do that because if you don't,
I don't, you can move it. Now, it's not a matter of will, it's a matter of just.
So last time, my take on the whole thing, and I guess if Brian would agree that, I'm just speaking for the people that were at the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. At the Board of Selectmen meeting last night, and I made this statement that I didn't think it was very fair that it was kind of a one-sided conversation because the planning board, well, Lynette was there too. The planning board was not at that meeting, so the Conservation Commission did voice some of their concerns. Board of Selectmen never really made any decision or ruling on it. The way I tried to get things to go was that tonight was the night to have a conversation where both sides would be involved. So, to amend or I guess I'm not really sure what exactly you're thinking or had in mind, but.
I thought that from last night's meeting, from what I took from it, everything, we were trying to keep it so the boards weren't conflicting, so we could combine everything and make it, one logical, attempt at coming to the same conclusion.
Moving on. Subdivision regulation, analysis, of subdivisions.
Mr. Chairman, this is not an easy job. What you have before you, and I apologize that you didn't get it in hard copy until the start of the meeting tonight, is 30 pages of what will probably be somewhere around 55 pages when I'm done of your new subdivision regulations. Remembering that this is a draft and that I have struggled a little bit with putting all of the pieces together. The Milton subdivision regulations that are in place now were last revised on December 14th, 2010. That's more than 8 years ago, and they are deficient. They're deficient in many places. And a lot of it kind of revolves around the idea that we don't have the regulation in place to control developers when they develop land. And we don't have the backing of our regulations to ensure that floodplain regulations are followed, that stormwater management plans are developed and put in place. The performance surety agreements are not in place. A lot of the things that modern subdivision regulations have aren't in your subdivision regulations today. So what you have before you is a beginning. It's a little bit more than 50% done. And the background on it, of course, is that I took a look at the New Hampshire model subdivision regulations, which are a few years ago. I added all of these pieces that we're talking about, at least up until page 30. There's a lot more to go. And I also added the things that are required by statute that are missing in your subdivision regulations. So you're going to read through here, and I think the first thing you're going to think of is, wow, that's a lot of stuff for us to be doing. That's a lot of stuff for us to be asking applicants that wanted to develop new subdivisions and put in new roads, but it really isn't. And it is in line with all of the newer subdivision regulations that towns have put in place across the state. I am, though, looking for your advice. And so, again, this is a homework assignment. If you want to just go to like page 26, which is about halfway, and get some of these comments put down in red, and we can go over it possibly in a workshop session for your next meeting, unless there's public hearings. That's probably the best thing. This really is a step into the future for the planning board, and there are things in there that we could have done that are already in the planning statute book, and that we don't do. And it's put right into the document, that we'll do it unless you see a good reason not to. And then those reasons are listed as well. So, don't be dismayed by the amount of language, and I know Peter's probably gonna be dismayed by the wording, and if you, again, I'll try and pare down some of the wording, but this really does follow the best of the best so far. What you'll get the next time from me is page 31 through 53 or so, plus the diagrams for the standards for building roads, the standards for doing stormwater management, and some of the other diagrams and cross sections that need to be added to the back. That will also come. I'm not going to repeat myself, but I do need to ask you one question though. I have also begun work on a conservation subdivision construct. This is not a conservation subdivision regulation, it's just a regular subdivision regulation. However, there are sections in here that you don't have the pages for yet that are going to talk about dedication of open space and conservation land for folks that want to subdivide land, and things that we could do that are in line with our zoning regulations that would be the carrot rather than the stick. So performance gets good stuff. Much like your open space subdivision regulations as part of your zoning ordinance, the development lots can be made smaller, and the frontage requirements, the dimensional requirements of the lot can be made smaller, but the yield plan will make it so that you don't get a bonus for more lots. In other words, it may entice a developer that owns a large piece of land to, I hate to use the word cluster because that's one of those, it's a planner's, one of those planner's words that they use. But you try and put the development over on one side somewhere, one side or together, and then you don't have to develop the rest of the land. In other words, you don't have to carve out 2-acre lots. You can carve out something that's more like a little bit less than an acre. It can have smaller frontages. You can have private roads that might not have to be constructed to town road standards. There's several things that you can do for a developer, as long as they take care of the road in perpetuity, and that's another thing that'll be in your subdivision regulations as well. The requirement for road management, road maintenance associations, and homeowners associations, and the fact that you need to see what that is, and that the people that live there have to sign on to taking care of the road in perpetuity so that the town doesn't have to do it. Because usually what happens after a few years is places like that go to the town and say, hey, will you accept my road as a town-maintained highway? The voters get it, and sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no, but that raises your taxes. So these kind of things are going to be in it. But the question I had for you, and I kind of went around the barn on this one, is you want to see the template or the model subdivision regulations for a conservation subdivision to see whether that might fit. And that would probably mean that you'd have to replace the open space regulations that are in zoning now. They really shouldn't be. They should be regulations anyway. you'd take them out of zoning. The voters would decide that, but that would be a zoning amendment. And you would add a conservation subdivision that has different outcomes for the town and for developers that are maybe better for Milton. We could have both. That's all I'm trying to say to you, is that you can have both regular and conservation, and you leave it up to the owner of the land. You know, of course, some of these have a minimum large lot size. Your open space subdivision regulations can't be used on a piece of land where the original parcel is less than 20 acres. So does that work? And that's a conversation that I think we all need to have. So that's a question that you could answer for me tonight, and I'll get to work on it.
Rather than just nodding my head, we're getting a buy-in and discussion with our fellow boarders. And it will speak to the details of the land, irrespective of what you're calling it. And you're going to get the goals of protection.
Yes, and a lot of that is in there too. So this is, like I said, this is a great leap forward from what we have in place now.
No, I won't say anything about number of pages. When you went through it, as you were going through this, did you notice, particularly in the gaps, whether either gaps or sequencing issues with our GIS acquisitions? I mean, are we buying them in the right order to be able to look more closely sooner?
This is a question just about the GIS.
Well, it's the application of the GIS, not, I mean, that's.
Okay, well, the GIS system, that's gonna be a web-based system that staff and all the public and citizens can use at home, will have many, I'll call them layers. There's layers, many of them are data set layers, because there's data attached to the things you can see on the map. And you can call that information up. And there's many, as many as the maps that are hanging on that map hanger there.
Based on how much money we think we're gonna have each year, we sequence.
Right.
When we get those layers.
Right.
So are those layers now, in hindsight, in the proper sequence? Or should we resequence what we're buying so we can get a better feel for some of these questions?
We're following my experience as the GIS coordinator in Milton Borough for 5 years. And we're also following the great experience that Cartograph or CII has. And as you know, they've developed most of the GISs in the towns around here and around New Hampshire. So it is the right sequence so far, but the second part of the answer is that we intend sometime later this spring to call together some workshops that are comprised of staff members, members of boards like the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, and the Economic Development Committee, and there's several others. They'll come in, we'll sit in the room, and we will talk about what data sets, data layers, each one of those folks needs. And when the ones they see as priorities, then we'll reprioritize the big list, and then we'll put it into a 5-year plan. So the GIS 5-year plan is on the warrant this year. It's another, I think it's $2,500. What that does, that's gonna probably buy 2 or 3 data sets. It will be added to the fledgling GIS system, and the voters will see that every year for 4 more years after this. $2,000-3,000 a year.
But we're already seeing a return on our investment already.
Well, you will. There's the GIS system is up in data format only, and you have to have a password to use it. It has a couple of bugs, but pretty soon it'll be out there. This is another great
No.
stride for the town.
What I was hearing from Peter is to make up the numbers on the content. Number 5 data set talks about commercial development sewer systems like the Ridge in Columbia. Packet number 3 talks about wetlands.
Mhm.
For us, working with the Conservation Commission and Development League, we want to make sure we have number 3 in place before number 5.
Right, that's, I hear you on that one.
Anybody else? Okay, in front of you, you have a notice of decision. I will read it. You are hereby notified that the following decision was made by the Milton Planning Board at the regular meeting on February 19th, 2019. By a vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed, and no extensions, the board voted to approve the request to renew the existing excavation permit submitted by David Page Jr., owner excavator, property located at 76 Piggott Hill Road, tax map 13, lot 3, in the excavation overlay district. Lot size is 229 acres, .42, excavation site is approximately 3. Being read into the minutes?
You need a motion to approve?
Yes.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
All in favor? Aye, opposed? You got any more comments, Bruce?
No,
Okay, we'll move on to approval of minutes of February 19th, 2019.
Make a motion to approve those minutes? I'll second.
Any discussion? Not hearing any, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I have no other business, Dana's not here to give us anything. Larry?
Just one, for the work that Bruce has put into this, I was looking through it, and on page 10, for example, you get written in one easy place that you will have a meeting continue without further notice. It's right in there, you can read it easily. You get to page 22, it goes through the details of moving into a major subdivision at the authority of the planning board to require it. Band-Aid on my finger. Okay, finger hurts. When you have an accurate vocabulary, you talk about distal, proximal, and interphalangeal joint. So you know exactly where it hurts. It's not the one at the end, it's not the one closest to your wrist, it's the one in the middle. That's the kind of detail that Bruce is putting in so we don't make mistakes.
it should all be in there. We've never had anything like that before. It's very process-driven and, I won't say form-driven, but it's what you do step by step. It's what the applicant's supposed to do step by step.
Okay. Who wants number 7?
I'll take it.
I have a
Brian,
motion to adjourn in a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Did the devil's in here.
can you tell me who made the motion to approve the minutes and seconded it? I kind of missed it.
I approve.
Yeah.
I second it.